The incident that I will be telling you about began when my sophomore year in college. I had just come back from the summer student mission, and it was a great time in Santa Cruz, and I had a great time. I was the youngest person there. I was after only my freshman year in college. But out of 60 people, even though I was youngest, I was put into one of the leadership roles. And we were very effective, and I led a team of students from across the country working with one of the churches, and we created the new programs that the organization had never done before during the summer student mission work, which was to organize a team from within a congregation and teaching them how to do evangelism and reach out to other people. And they've never done that before. This is now, back then it was called the Campus Crusade for Christ, and now it's called the Crew, and I was involved with that. But yet they never worked with churches. That's why all those, my friends who were part of that Bible study system or university Bible study system, this is a side note, none of them goes to church after they graduated from college, because they're so used to college Bible study system that when they had to go to church on Sunday morning, they found it boring. They never became part of it, and they never learned how to serve in the congregation. That's why one of our main focuses on campus ministry is worship service and not Bible study. Because what we are more interested in is raising up leaders who will serve church for their lifetime rather than being involved in Bible study for 2 to 4 years when they're in college. So somebody like Kenzie, who will come through here and will go on the grad school and beyond, and hopefully come back to Los Angeles and be part of this congregation again after she, go through further education. But even if she doesn't, we will send her away. Yes. We'll send her from here as a trained leader who can walk into any church anywhere and be able to serve and provide leadership. And that's a kind of the ministry that we want to build with young people. But that's what I started working with the freshman year I was out of college, and I was recognized for innovative ministries and the new ideas, and it was really exciting. And I was really excited for what we could do in the school year. First week when we got back, we were told by the staff that they had planned an illusionist to come to campus, and they were going to have a big event in about 4 weeks. It was a magic show. But the person told gospel story through that, and they were going to have that event. And so we were all asked to volunteer and to hand out flyers. And on University of Wisconsin-Madison campus, there is a memorial union, and there is a big walking area where once you come from the State Street and you're getting onto campus, you go through the Union Mall, and then you go on to the classes beyond that. And so right in the front of that mall, right in the middle of that, group of us were handing out flyers. And that particular morning, only 3 of us were there. I was not even supposed to be there, and between my classes I stopped, and one of my friends was inside a refrigerator box, which had all the posters taped, and got whole little holes cut out, so he could just stand and get in the people's way. And he thought that would be a funny way to get them to look at the poster. And then another guy was in a bear suit, thinking that would be a really good way to promote Jesus. And so he was handing out flyers in a bear suit. And so I came by, and I'm the only one in plain clothes handing out flyers. Then all of a sudden, this guy comes up to me. He's about a foot taller, he weighs twice as much, and he has almost like casting a shadow over me. His words to me were, "Why are you condemning me?" And I didn't know what to say. I'm going, "Me? I'm condemning you?" And he wouldn't even stop for me to answer. He just started down this verbal tirade. "And you are condemning me, and you Christians," and I said, "Why are you condemning? I'm condemning you." And he, when I finally figured out how to say what I wanted to say, because I was utterly speechless because never had that experience before. And you know that I don't get speechless very often, okay? And I didn't know what to say, and when I finally said, who do I condemn? He said, you're a Christian, aren't you? I said, yes. And he said, then you're condemning me. I said, I don't know you. He said, but you're a Christian. And Christian condemn. And then he went on, I said, then who does Christian condemn? And he went on a long list of people. And so who Christians condemn? And he didn't miss anybody. And he went on and listed one after another, and in the midst of it, I just picked one of them. And then I said, are you this? And he stopped and he's stunned. And he goes, yes. And this, you know, and here I can tell you, and I didn't write this in the story, but the young man, he basically, when he was listing, one of the things he listed, and it was back then, he goes, and then he said homosexuals and so on, so I just said, are you homosexual? And he said, yes, I am. And he said, and then you condemn. And in the process, I found out that his father was a Methodist minister. And so he heard the condemnation from home and his father, and he was a graduate student at Wisconsin. And yet he was carrying this, and he went on and on. And I just tried to explain to him that God accepts all people, and that God welcomes all, and God does not condemn anybody, and he wouldn't have anything to do with it. Try to explain to him that everybody is in the same boat, that everybody needs Jesus, and the forgiveness and acceptance by Jesus, and he wouldn't hear of it at all. And he went on and on and on, and then finally he said, I can't believe in a fascist God like that. And I basically would have agreed if his mind was that God had expected people to be perfect, people to be without sin, people who have done nothing wrong, people who can meet certain standards, then if he thought those are the only people that were acceptable to God, I can see why that he said, I can't believe in a God like that. Because I'm sure I would have joined them. He wouldn't listen, but when he said, fascist God, all of a sudden I noticed movement around me. I looked around. This is the first time I'd taken my eyes off him, and apparently there was a crowd of about 50 people that had surrounded me and him. And essentially, it was a crowd, the Roman crowd that had gathered watching the lion devouring a Christian. And moment he said, I can't believe in a fascist God like that, and declared his intent that it was that he refusing to believe, then when the crowd just simply lost interest and dispersed. But as long as he was attacking Christians, and as long as Christian was losing, crowd was very interested. Now, in the midst of all of this, I had to, and found out that episode lasted about 30 minutes. And I didn't realize the time had passed. And I just sit there trying to say, not knowing what to say. I don't know how I could stand around for 30 minutes and not say anything. But couldn't figure out what to say, couldn't figure out how to convince this man otherwise. And this was a completely different experience than what I had during the summer, when I was recognized as one of the innovative leaders and creating something new. And the church that I was working with in California, in Santa Cruz, was a 5,000 member congregation. And yet, even with that congregation back in the 70s, there were over 5,000 people. I was able to create new programs for them that they didn't know how to do. And yet, when I came back onto campus, I couldn't answer one man who asked me questions. And I couldn't convince them otherwise. And I had friends who were apparently in the crowd. They came to me later and said, oh, Sonny, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I'm going, where were you? They go, well, we were there. But nobody said a word. Nobody came to my rescue. And I was left all alone. that day, then I just went back to my dorm room and I had to sit there and think. I had to think for myself, is this worth it? Is what I went through something that I'm willing to go through over and over? I was reading biographies about missionaries, and I read a lot of them. And was reading, for example, on William Carey. He was a missionary for 7 years and did not have one single convert. 7 years of work, not one believer. But yet he kept at it. And I had to ask myself, what enabled him to do something like that? What enabled people to continue to believe when they are neglected, abandoned, as in the story of Ishmael, the oldest son of Abraham, the son of one of the sons of promise. Now, if you notice, the entire Middle East and the world today, and this is something that the United States politics does not understand, is that this is a battle between two brothers, Ishmael and Isaac. And that fight has not ended. And that continues to this day. And yet, what we find is that in the midst of this, in the midst of these stories of people being abandoned, people being left with nothing, that somehow God is still in the picture. And we need to understand what is that enables us to continue to find faith even when things get difficult. The passage here today, part of the passage says that we must count the cost. He says we must take up the cross in order to follow Jesus, and we must lose life in order to find it. And so this is when I started picking up a phrase with my kids hated when they were little, which is simply when things happen, I just simply say, well, it's only life. If you let little thing like life bother you, then almost anything will. And it's only life. But that was a phrase that I came up with that day for myself, to find ways of keep going. I had, in some ways, realized that I had so wanted to fit into the life that my parents had created when they immigrated to the United States. And you have to remember, when I was in college, I was in the United States. I had been in the United States only 9 years prior to that. I was 12 years old when I came, and I was in college, and I was trying to figure out, find my ways, and I was trying to fit in. I grew up in a very, all-white world of southwest corner of Wisconsin, which is now, if you look at the political map, a very red part of the state of Wisconsin. I mean, and grew up with all kinds of statements that made no sense to me, but yet continued to have to prove my existence was okay. Because half the people that I ran into would say, oh, you're Asian, but you speak really good English. And other half says, but you've been here more than 2 years, so how can you speak, why do you still have accent? And some who say, well, why is your hair still black? Don't you drink milk? Oh yeah, those were real statements. People said, they asked me, did you find that if your skin had lightened after you came to the United States and, drinking milk and cheese? People actually asked me that. And there are others who have done things, said things, that would continue to tell me that my life did not matter and did not count. Much the same way as Abraham and Sarah had completely abandoned Ishmael because it did not fit into their scheme of thinking about who is going to get the inheritance. Isn't that funny? That the entire world that has been known nothing but fighting for the last 3,000 to 4,000 years was all about inheritance and land and money? Nothing has changed, has it? So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, are we willing to pick up our cross? Now, it sounds like that Christianity demands a lot from us. We use people and different ministers, pastors, and evangelists have talked about picking up the cross and counting the cost to follow Jesus and how important that is, and that those who have done so somehow have a better or stronger faith type of idea. And they said, in order to really be a good Christian, you must count the cost and you must be willing to give up things and you must follow in this way. And somehow they picked that up as a badge of honor. And they talk about what they had given up to follow. They say, well, I had given up this career and now I'm serving God as a minister over here. And so I somehow have made a greater sacrifice. And so somehow I am more acceptable. I actually had a minister friend tell me that one time. Because he used to be a lawyer and it became a minister. And then he talked about how he had given up. He makes so much less money, but yet, he believed that, God will honor that and he will bless him. And I just scratched my head because he couldn't understand why I didn't agree with him. But we are asked to pick up our cross, but it is not in simply the idea that picking up the cross is more spiritual. But picking up the cross and counting our cost is really coming to examine our values. What is important to us? How valuable do we think we are? Hagar and Ishmael ran out of food and water, and they thought they were nothing to Abraham. They believed that they had nothing else to offer, nobody in the world cared for them because they were aliens in a foreign land. And she was Egyptian, and he was half-breed. And so nobody would have wanted them. And they were valueless in the world that they were living in. But yet, what Matthew tells us is that to God, we are valuable. He says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are more valuable than many sparrows. So I'm at least worth a few cents. I'm at least worth a few pennies. But you have to remember, the sparrows that they're talking about are what they were offering to God when they were coming to the temple. They were part of that. They were the sparrows and were also just continued the presence of the simply common birds, but yet they were reminded that even the inexpensive birds were really counted by God. And if something that's as inexpensive as something that you can buy several for a penny, how much more valuable are we? Reason that we can count the cost, the reason that we can simply decide to pick up the cross and follow God is not because that is a spiritual venture in itself, but because that is a reminder for us that we heard that God values us. And so, if we are to count the cost, what is the cost? What is the cost of not knowing or not experiencing God's blessings? What is the cost? What are we willing to give up? What are we willing to trade God's blessings for? There are blessings that God has given us, promises that God has fulfilled. Even though Ishmael and Hagar felt that Abraham did not honor the promises that God had made, but God honored that promise, even if the human beings did not. In the same way, you are valuable to God, and God will fulfill all the promises of blessing. We count the cost. What does that mean? It just means at that moment, when we face difficulty, we can choose to follow God. And that moment when I was faced with a verbal attack, and when I sat down, I had to think through, what did I give up? Did I have to give up anything? What is the cost? Is somebody questioning me once in a while, or somebody judging me based on what some other people have done in the name of Jesus, which I didn't believe in any of this. And even though I was misunderstood, and I was attacked for misunderstanding, because I was not attacked for what I believed or what I had done, but it's what someone else had done. But even with all of that, we are asked the question, are we willing to follow? Because in so doing, we recognize and we experience how valuable we are to God. Do you know that God values you more than anything else? Do you know that you are more important to God than everything that God had put to afloat in the sky and all the fishes that God had put in the water in the sea? You are more valuable to God than anything, because you are created in the image of God for the purposes of God. You were created to receive God's blessing. And in so doing, and in your quote-unquote counting the cost, that you will be showing blessings unto others. That for you and me, we are simply asked to see the value that God has in us, to just simply recognize that you and I are valuable to God. Amen.